Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. Today we're diving into a story that honestly feels like a plot twist out of a political thriller. The US government, yes, America, land of free markets and capitalism, is about to take a direct stake in Intel, the country's biggest chip maker. If you're scratching your head right now thinking, wait, isn't that the kind of thing China does with its state-owned enterprises? Well, you're not alone. Let's break this down, because what's happening here might signal a massive shift in how America sees its own economic future. So first, let's set the stage. For decades, America prided itself on having a free market system. The government's role was supposed to be limited, set the rules, enforce contracts, maybe regulate monopolies, but don't pick winners and losers. That's what we always said separated the US from countries like China, where the state directly funds and even controls its biggest companies. But suddenly, Washington is saying, you know what? We're going to put taxpayer money directly into Intel. And the reason? Chips, microchips, semiconductors, the tiny little wafers that power everything in modern life, from iPhones to fighter jets. They're the backbone of our economy, our security, and even our daily routines. But here's the kicker. Why now? Why is America suddenly willing to look a little more like Beijing? To answer that, we have to go back to the rivalry that's shaping this century. The US versus China. China's model has always been different. Take Huawei, for example. It didn't just rise out of nowhere. It had massive state support, from low-interest loans to favorable policies. Or look at BYD, the electric car giant. Beijing practically cleared the path for it. Subsidies, infrastructure, even regulations tilted in its favor. And don't forget rare earths, those obscure minerals that are critical for batteries, defense systems, and clean energy. China realized early on that controlling rare earth production wasn't just an economic move, it was strategic dominance. So the state stepped in, funded mining, controlled exports, and built an industry others had to depend on. Compare that to America. Historically, Washington shied away from such direct control, but not always. Remember the 2008 financial crisis? The US government stepped in to save General Motors and Chrysler with billions in bailout money. They also injected cash into banks like Citigroup. For a short time, the US government literally owned stakes in these private companies. But the key difference, the goal back then was to stabilize the economy, not to strategically guide industries for long-term national advantage. Once the crisis passed, Washington sold off its stakes and said, we're out, go back to the market. But today, it feels different. The competition with China isn't a temporary crisis. It's structural, it's long-term, and semiconductors are at the center of it. Think of it like the space race in the Cold War. Back then, the US didn't just sit around waiting for private companies to figure out rockets. No, the government launched NASA, poured billions into R&D, and said, we're going to the moon. They didn't just fund science for the sake of it. They saw space as a matter of national security and prestige. Fast forward to today, and semiconductors are the moon of this era. They determine who leads in artificial intelligence, in advanced weapons, in the economy of tomorrow. And China's not waiting around. Beijing is investing hundreds of billions into chip production, pushing companies like SMIC to catch up with or even surpass Western firms. So here comes the twist. America is realizing that free markets alone might not cut it anymore. Intel, despite being one of the biggest names in chips, has fallen behind Taiwan's TSMC and South Korea's Samsung in manufacturing the most advanced chips. And that's a huge vulnerability. Why? Because if China ever moved militarily against Taiwan, it could cut off America from the world's most advanced semiconductors almost overnight. That's like finding out your entire military depends on one foreign supplier, and that supplier is sitting 100 miles off the coast of your biggest rival. Now, let's be clear. This isn't the first time America has used government power to push innovation. Remember DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. This is the agency that helped give us the internet, GPS, and stealth technology. Or think about how the Pentagon's contracts helped launch Silicon Valley in the first place. So in a way, Washington funding Intel is less of a departure and more of a return to a time when the U.S. government wasn't afraid to get its hands dirty in shaping the future. But here's the real question. Is this the start of a new era of American state capitalism? Or is it just a one-off move to make sure Intel survives and stays competitive? That's what we need to think about. Let's look at Japan as a case study. In the 1970s and 80s, Japan's Ministry of International Trade and Industry, MITI, actively steered industries. It supported semiconductors, steel, and automobiles. And it worked, at least for a while. Japanese companies like NEC and Toshiba became world leaders in electronics. But there was a catch. As global competition shifted and as Japan's economy slowed, that heavy government involvement became less effective. By the 1990s, the U.S. surged back in tech leadership thanks to the rise of software, personal computing, and eventually the internet, areas where government support mattered, but private innovation dominated. So will America's Intel experiment look more like Japan's MITI, an era of rapid catch-up followed by stagnation, or like DARPA's Internet revolution, where government seeding sparked a wave of private innovation? That's the trillion-dollar question. Now think about the political optics. Donald Trump has been hammering the idea of America first for years. To his supporters, the idea of the government investing in Intel isn't socialism, it's patriotism. It's about protecting American jobs, American technology, and American security. To critics, though, it raises alarms. If Washington starts picking winners, what stops it from sliding down the slippery slope of industrial policy that distorts markets and creates inefficiencies? After all, if Intel gets taxpayer backing, why not Ford? Why not Boeing? Where does it end? But here's where the China comparison keeps popping up. Beijing doesn't ask those questions. If the state decides an industry is strategic, it pours in money, no hesitation. That's why China now dominates solar panels, controls most of the world's battery supply chains, and is pushing hard into EVs. And that's the pressure point for America. If you play by old rules while your competitor rewrites the rulebook, you risk falling behind. Here's a good analogy. Imagine two runners in a marathon. One is running with weights on their ankles, saying, "We have to play fair." The other throws off the weights, takes energy drinks every mile, and even gets pushed by a team car following alongside. Who's going to win? That's how many policymakers in Washington now see the U.S.-China competition. And that's why they're ready to bend the old free market rules. Of course, this isn't without risks. Government involvement can go wrong, badly wrong. Look at Solyndra, the solar company that got over $500 million in federal loan guarantees during the Obama years, only to go bankrupt 2 years later. Taxpayers ate the loss, and critics used it as proof that the government has no business in business. If something like that happened with Intel, the political fallout would be massive. We're talking congressional hearings, headlines screaming government waste, and a backlash against industrial policy altogether. But let's flip that around. What if it works? What if Intel, with government backing, builds the most advanced fabs in Arizona and Ohio, creating tens of thousands of jobs, securing America's chip supply, and reestablishing U.S. leadership in semiconductors? That's the dream scenario, and it would reshape not just the tech industry, but geopolitics. Here's where it gets even more interesting. If America pulls this off, it could spark a broader rethink of economic ideology. For decades, U.S. policymakers preached globalization and free trade. But with China rising, the mood has shifted toward protectionism, reshoring, and national resilience. Buying a stake in Intel isn't just about chips. It's about rewriting the playbook of American capitalism. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Capitalism has never been one size fits all. The US model in the 1950s looked very different from the 1990s, which looks very different from today. Back in the Cold War, defense spending fueled huge amounts of innovation. In the 1990s, it was deregulation and globalization. Today, it might be strategic state investment. In a way, America isn't abandoning capitalism, it's adapting it. So here's my take. Washington's move to invest in Intel is both bold and risky. It's bold because it admits that the free market alone might not secure America's technological edge. And it's risky because it opens the door to political meddling and potential failure. But if the US wants to stay competitive against China's all-in state capitalism, maybe this is the only play left on the board. And now, I want to throw the question back to you. Is America right to step into the driver's seat and back Intel with taxpayer money? Or is this just the first step down a slippery slope where Washington plays venture capitalist with our economy? More importantly, what does this say about the future of capitalism itself? Are we witnessing the birth of a new mixed model where government and markets blend in ways we haven't seen since the Cold War? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to hear what you think. Do you see this as smart strategy or as government overreach? And while you're at it, if you found this breakdown helpful, hit that like button, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe. Because the battle over semiconductors isn't just about tech. It's about the future of power in the 21st century. And trust me, this story is just getting started. Thanks for watching. See you next time.